Israel-Palestine conflict. I mean, historically, we have been hearing about this century-old conflict for a pretty long time. And the saddest thing or the worst part of it is the conflict that happens almost on a yearly basis. And the most recent incident almost reaching with the death toll of almost 48 people being murdered, with almost 13 children within it. Palestinian families are asked to flee from their own homeland. They're asked to be literally thrown out of their own place. And we must have also seen about the judgment or the most, the delayed judgment on the possible eviction of Palestinian families from their homes in Jerusalem. And all these sequence of events definitely set us back to think about what has been the history or what has been the beginning or initiation of all these set of events, because the whole world looks into this matter with a pretty huge interest. And the United States, of course, being one of the biggest ally of Israel, the stance that it has been taking, the stance the new government has been taking. So there have been a couple of things that why Israel and Palestine conflict grab a huge international interest across the globe. And with adherence to the latest developments, we are definitely forced to look back in the history. We are definitely forced to compare the current situation to what it has been before. So, guys, what do you think? I mean, there's no point of asking what do you think, because most of our opinions will be single-sided. Because here, Palestinians are who are being forced to leave their nation. They are being categorized as the oppressed class for the time being by the Israel. So it would be great to have your opinions as well being inserted, because every single points added on to this matter will make us introspect on what is the real cause behind the current violence and conflicts happening in Palestine.
So I think before getting into the history of the whole Arab-Israeli conflict, we need to talk about what exactly is happening now. So the recent Supreme Court judgment by the Israeli court stated that Israelis can move into the homes of the Palestinians. And there's also an Israeli law which states that if Palestinians don't have title deeds that go before 1948 when the war took place, they can be forced out of their own homes. And this has been an ongoing issue, and the Supreme Court has postponed the hearing. So keeping all that in mind, we can see tinges of colonialism and sort of extremism in these cases. I'm not siding with what the Hamas on the side of the Palestinians is doing, or what the Israeli police or the Israeli army is doing, but there have been tinges of colonialism in the way Israel has moved about their operations. So if we go back to the times of the Ottoman Empire, we know that all three sections of this particular land, the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims lived harmoniously. It's only after that, after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire fell, and when the British took control of this particular disputed land and this area where Israel and Palestine is located, that's when the conflict started. Because in 1947, the UN proposed a division of land of British Palestine, which basically stated that certain amount of area would go to the Israelis, and they can call it as their own independent nation, Israel. Certain amount of area would go to the Palestinians, and they can declare independence and call it their own state of Palestine. And it was given in the proposal that Jerusalem would be known as an international zone. So what this means is that it would have a special recognition, and it wouldn't fall under the jurisdiction of either Israel or Palestine, because it is a center of all three holy sites for the Christians, Muslims, and the Jews.
And Jews.
Yeah. So after this, there was the Arab-Israeli War in 1948. So that's when things changed. So after the Arab-Israeli War in 1948, Israel basically won the war, and they encroached upon the boundaries and the territories of the Palestinians, which were demarcated in the proposal by the UN. So once this started, Israel took control of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and started to slowly start their removal of Palestinians. And then during this whole time, there was a mass exodus of Palestinians into Syria, into Egypt, and all the neighboring Arab countries, because they wanted to seek refuge. And this became a huge refugee crisis back then. And then came another important war, which was the 6 Days War. So again, in this case, Israel won, and Israel captured a certain part of Syria, which was known as the Golan Heights, and also the Sinai Peninsula, which belonged to Egypt at that time. So then there were many efforts to broker peace records between both the countries. There was the Camp David Accords. There was There were many other talks between both countries, and basically both factions. Even the US tried to play a mediator, but none of this happened. And whenever there was a leader that tried to take the initiative to come to negotiations and come to mutual consensus, that leader was assassinated. And this can be seen with the ex-president of the Israelis as well. When he sort of came to an agreement that, okay, fine, the Palestinian lands that were decided can be given back to them, and he reached an agreement with the PLO, which is the Palestine Liberation Organization, he was assassinated. So this shows that the extremist groups on both ends, which is currently the Hamas, which is residing in Gaza, in the region of Gaza, and the Israeli extremists, they both oppose negotiations and they both oppose mutual consensus. So this conflict will keep going on until either one lays down their arms and says, "Okay, we're willing to negotiate." But when you have leaders of both sides siding with the fact that they don't want to negotiate and they don't want to come to a consensus, it leads to more conflicts and more problems. If you see the Israeli Prime Minister, he's being a little neutral on who controls Jerusalem and who controls the holy site of the Temple Mount and Haram al-Sharif. He states that because basically that entire site in the Al-Aqsa Mosque is basically managed and governed by a Jordanian Waqf. It's not managed by Palestine or Israel. So, Joel, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, actually, it was well summed up with regard to the historical aspect. But then, what like the point of view, like what we're trying to come up with, is not exactly like a one-sided argument as such, but then also bring up as to how, like how Minhaaj had pointed out with regard to how the negotiations have failed on both sides as such. And if we look at the history prior to 1900s as such, I think I'll just be sharing the screen for a bit, and this is how at least if we look at the biblical aspect of how Israel was. So this is what we call as the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes of Israel are these. So you have the children of Jacob, and Jacob was called Israel, and out of and you had these many tribes as such. And actually what we refer to in the biblical portions is like you have Israel and you have Judah and several other parts as well. And this is what we have in today's context of how Israel is today. Israel and Palestine. So you have the Gaza city and you have the West Bank as such. So these areas, and how Palestine initially, how it was and how it is being reduced, or how there have been Jewish settlements also in the Palestinian lands, alleged by either side. So one needs to also look into the aspect of how the entire thought behind of how even Israel or why did all the Jews from many parts of the world come in and try to settle in the first place. So this is basically the biblical aspect of how it was. You have the 12 tribes, and also you have the kingdoms of Judah. And the first temple, which was first built by Solomon, and he was a son of David, and then that was razed down by the Babylonians. There have been some fake websites going around saying it's the temple was pulled down by the Islamic rulers, but no, it was by the Babylonians. And the second time when it was rebuilt, second temple when it was built, it was brought down by the Roman emperor. And that time you had seen a wide even there have been historical evidence also of Jews living in these areas as such, and these Jews have actually spread out to other countries. So you had the surrounding nations, and also today you have Jews. Even in India also we had Jews. If let's say, since Maria from Kerala, and like both of us are from Kerala, we have the Kochi used to be a place where there was a Jewish settlement as well, like the very famous synagogue as well.
There are Jewish churches as well present there, even now.
Synagogue.
Although they're not in function, I believe there are still. Yeah, go ahead, Joel.
So we have settlements. That America is almost full of like what many people say it's full of Jews, and you have Europe as well. But then once the World War II and you had Hitler, you're trying to decimate the Jews as such. You had around figures of around 6 million Jews trying to like being sent to gas chambers and killed and those aspects. So you had the entire Zionist movement, and then you had the aspect of, okay, we need to have our homeland, and where do we go? So there some people were saying we might go to some place near Argentina or somewhere, but then somehow what was recognized is that this particular land is where in the Middle East or for us Asians, it's the West Asian part of the country, of the world. It is where they had proposed to have it. So then you had several of the people coming in, and then like as Minhaaj pointed out with regard to the Ottoman Empire and how it was defeated by the British, and then British kind of screwed over it with regard to their mandate. And then it went to the UN, and the UN declared it, and the 6-day war, and all those aspects were brought forward. What is the key argument is that Jerusalem, which is currently being in dispute, it is so culturally and religiously unique because you have all the three religions. You have all of the famous sites in
the Semitic religions. Yeah.
So you have Jerusalem being the holy, in many parts of India, many the Christians go on Holy Land tours, or many Holy Land is what they consider as, or even the Muslims, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is currently under the entire tension where it happened, the clash between the police and the Palestinians as well. So that is the third most holiest site after Mecca and Medina, and then you have the Christians as well, wherein the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is where it's believed that Christ had resurrected from the dead, and that is what we are able to bring, like the aspect of how these three communities, despite the entire tensions as such, you had all the three of them living together significantly, but there have been questions raised on, is the actions taken by Israel justifiable? But then, as you know, the history of Israel, and how there have been several extremism from both ends, and you had many of the underground works in Israel as well, and also the current Palestinians, the PLO, and then the Hamas as well, the Hamas as well, and how we had even the Munich killings as well, where in the Munich Olympics, how the Palestinian, the Black Sabbath or the Palestinian organization had gone and gunned down several of the Israelites, the Israel players in Munich, and how the Mossad came after them, and so it's a very colluded and it's just too difficult to separate as to who takes claim over whom, and I think we ourselves also are pretty much new to this, like new as in like we are, like, since we are the onlookers in these aspects, so what we may not be able to carry the sentiment of both sides of the spectrum as such. So yeah, so over to you, Maria.
So Joel, I agree to it to a lot of extent, but the problem that comes up with people who actually analyze Israeli-Palestinian conflict is that there's an attempt to bring in a communal tinge to this aspect. I agreed. There is definitely a communal aspect of analyzing this matter, but more, if you consider it into a deeper notion, it is more into an ethnic cleansing aspect. It is a fight of Israelis versus Palestinians, and these Palestinians comprise of a lot of ethnicities. It is not just a particular community that is being oppressed in the name of Palestinians. It's a pretty well-versed fact. It is a complex set of a group. I cannot refer to as a community. Moreover, is the issue at hand, the issue currently at hand with regarding to the Palestinian families being asked to evict from Sheikh Jarrah, the neighborhood in East Jerusalem, and the appeal that has been sought by the Palestinian families towards the Supreme Court being delayed, just like Minhaaj had been pointed out. If you look into the matter that was brought before the Supreme Court, it was a pro-settler organization, which was called Nahalat Shimon. And the argument that they had came up was by using a 1970 law that simply argued that the owners of the land before 1948, that is before the creation of the state of Israel, were Jewish families. So this was the argument that was brought forth by an age-old factum that was brought forth by this so-called pro-settler organization, such that these Palestinian families should be evicted from their respective neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. And Palestinians, on the other hand, have clearly stated that these restitution laws, the restitution laws that are there in Israel right now, are completely unfair. And even if you look into the ambit of international law as well, there is no real legal means to reclaim the property. And as a result of which in the past, they had lost it to the Jewish families much before the late 1940s. So these are the two sides of a coin that we have at hand. And Israeli court, deciding in favor of Israel or in favor of families who would like to replace the Jewish households, replace the Palestinian households over there. In this particular aspect, Yeah, Minhaaj, please.
If you look at it, after the Arab-Israeli war, when Israel won the war, when the territory was demarcated after the UN proposal in 1947, Israeli settlers were encouraged to go into the Palestinian territories, which were specifically
Correct.
Gaza City and the West Bank territory, the west of the
Correct.
river, to go and occupy the Palestinian homes. And even if you look at this archaic law, whether they say that, okay, fine, if they have the title deeds before 1948, because it's basically not possible, because after the Arab-Israeli war, the Palestinians were basically made to leave Israel, made to leave that proclaimed territory of Israel, and were
Correct.
basically treated as refugees. So they would obviously not have any title deeds. They would not have any deeds to their property. And I've seen several videos on several news channels like BBC and Al Jazeera where they say that we have been living here for 65, 70 years, and the only way we'll move out of our own homes is in our coffins. So that's how this
Absolutely.
matter has this
I
how this
think
matter has exploded.
correct. I mean, the situation they are right now is pretty pathetic because they have been asked to like move from their household on a day-to-day basis. They're like scared of their lives. They have no clue on when are they going to die out of a shell bomb or an attack. The most recent, I mean, for Indians, an Indian was killed yesterday out of a shell bomb attack. I mean, according to the news reports, she was talking to her family in India. She was talking to her family. She was having a conversation with her family in India via video conferencing, and this shell bomb came unexpectedly, and she died. So, I mean, these kind of attacks that keep on happening will not improve the situation at all. And do you guys really feel that diplomacy worked in any ways? I do not deny the fact that ICJ had its hand in involving into a matter of diplomacy or into bringing up a judgment against the Israeli annexation, or even United States, although they are pro-Israeli, has attempted some way or another for a diplomatic conversation. But do you really think that all those international organizations, the so-called international organizations with the so-called laws and regulations that we have played any role in settling the disputes that have been happening between Israel and Palestine?
Absolutely not. Their passive role can be condemned in this particular situation, especially bodies like the UN, when they have the resources to bring both sides together and try to form some kind of negotiation. We can sort of see this heading somewhere, because, like I said earlier, the only reason why these negotiations haven't been taking place is because of the extremist groups on both ends. The Hamas, if you look at the case of Palestinians, and the Israeli armed forces, if you look at the case of Israel. And this conflict will be ongoing if nobody comes to the forefront and tries to settle this matter at once. And as an international community, as Joel stated, we can't empathize, and we can't sort of feel and experience what the Palestinians are going through or the Israelis are going through in this particular case, because I feel like they're just being uh, treated like, what do you say, herds of sheep. They've been directed by their political leaders, they've been directed by their extremist leaders to go and do a particular thing, and encouraged to take up to violence in order to resolve this matter, which will not actually resolve through violence. It's through dialogue and negotiation. Only then will this matter resolve. Joel, do you have
See,
anything to add?
yeah. See, like looking at the points stated, uh, if you also see the silence of the Islamic world as well, like even with UAE and even Bahrain or even Saudi as well. Usually, what is always looked at as to how the Palestinians always look to the Saudis for the help as well. But then, see, what we're looking at right now is the world is completely changing, and the previously what used to be like the Islamic community, right now it's even Saudi also is being questioned on several other aspects as well. So like as you know, last year Trump was able to get Saudi, Bahrain, UAE, and I think one more country, right? Yeah, and Israel together, and that was
Yeah, yeah.
completely unprecedented because like usually the Arab world does not recognize Israel, and many countries don't recognize Israel for in the first place. But by formulating ties, especially being a part of the Arab world, is something which ponders a thought as to how the world is changing, for the matter of fact, and how, like, see, uh, agreed that the like and huge amount of families are being evicted, and huge amount of violence is being done. But then if you don't have a systematic police, or you don't have a systematic system in the first place in Palestine, and the garb of like the at least in some parts wherein the Hamas the Hamas is just shooting rockets onto the and also the same way the Iron Dome trying to intercept them, and then similarly retaliating for attacks as well. We are losing lives, but then if you look at it from a very historical aspect, every country has its own share of conflicts and struggles as well. So if we take India for the India in the first place, some may say Kashmir is today under threat. But then also what we saw in the 90s was that there was a huge eviction of Kashmiri Pandits out of their lands, despite being living there for so many years as well. So there also people might ask, like, why were you silent there? Why some groups are telling stand with Palestine, or some groups saying stand with Israel? Like, some people are saying it's very ironic for the right wing community to stand with Israel, but also on the same hand, not really question the regime who was at that particular period of time, because for the matter of fact, sadly, we heard about the Kashmiri issue very recent, only a few years back, after a huge amount of media coverage as well. Or even let's take the Ram Janmabhoomi issue, or even Hagia Sophia as well. Like Ram Janmabhoomi, like what has been stated by several right-wing pages, that okay, this Al-Aqsa Mosque was razed down by Islamic invaders. It is incorrect that it was razed down by Babylonians, and then second time it was razed down by the Roman Empire. But then the mosque is currently built on top of the destroyed remains. If that can be an argument as to what they can look at. But then if you look at with regard to the Ram Janmabhoomi issue, or with regard to the Hagia Sophia in particular, with countries like Turkey saying let's go against Israel, it's a very ironical aspect, because even over there, Hagia Sophia was initially like a church or of Christian denomination, was later made into a museum, and then he himself forced upon it to make it into a mosque as well. So as human beings, even in the Ram Janmabhoomi issue as well, what was brought down was a criminal act of bringing down the entire mosque as well. But then also the historical aspect of the sentiment of the people as well, as to there was the existence of the temple according to what the belief also has been stated. So like each community and each, like, if one person comments on the other community or the other country as well, I think we have to first pick the speck of our own eye, than question or try to say, okay, we stand with them or we, because what we are looking at is a very superficial level. Who knows that our stance might change if we were living as them, and if we were living as them, we won't be knowing what we are living in here in India as well. So I think we should be empathetic to those who are being whose lives are being destroyed, but also understand that the several historical aspects as well, as to how if, like, there can be an argument, how far can you go back to history for your current deeds, but also the argument as to, it is what it is. We can't forget what has happened as well. So I think it does put me in a place as to where do I stand in the particular. But then over to you guys.
I think,
that's actually go ahead, Minhaaj.
Yeah, that point put forward by you, Joel, is very, very relevant. Let's look at what's happening in our own backyard and then comment what's happening in our neighbors. And looking into that issue as well, we should keep in mind that there was a point in history where religion was never a problem. Where even if you look at the whole territory that's being disputed in Israel and Palestine right now, all three sections of Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived harmoniously at one point of time. It's just now that there have been political backings, there have been extremist groups trying to push their own motion forward, which is leading to these conflicts. And of course, any kind of eviction, any kind of I think the word Maria used was ethnic cleansing, is condemnable. And that's something we stand against at all times.
Absolutely, Minhaaj. And a comparison with what had happened, taking back to Ram Janmabhoomi issue or Babri Masjid demolition and all, it's definitely worth comparing. But still, again, when we, at the end of the day, when we bring in Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it is again the conflict between two ethnicities beyond the scope of communities. However, at the end of the day, it's all about intolerance. It's all about intolerance. It's all about the oppressor versus the oppressed. So there's no point of, dragging a difference between both these issues. At the end of the day, both travel in the same boat. But okay, let's again not separate ourselves from what that we had been discussing per se. Like I had told you guys as well, with respect to diplomacy. Did diplomacy ever work between Israel and Palestine? And the fact of concern that even I had at hand was, again, what had the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights with regards to what that has been happening in Sheikh Jarrah recently stated that what is happening right now, or this kind of eviction of these people is purely illegal in nature, whether it be under the grounds of humanitarian law, or whether it be, international humanitarian law, or whether it be in the grounds that can even amount to war crime. Because if you make use of a law that has been in application ever in the history, much before 1970, much before 1940s in Israel and Jerusalem, and if you make use of that particular law, which is being applied by a competent Supreme Court with respect to, or in Israel, in an inherently discriminatory manner, it has to be questioned. We know how important, like even if I come back to India's case also, our Supreme Court came up with the verdict with respect to Ram Janmabhoomi issue, which had led to, a series of discussions in the country, and that ended up with all those discussions. We literally ignored the kind of violence that we had been facing ever since the Gujarat riots. I'll just keep all those things aside. So what we had been facing in the past and what currently is going on in Israel-Palestinian conflict, with respect to the most recent judgment, everything that questions is how do we make use of the law? How do we make use of the domestic law? And how it is in coherence with the international law that has to be applied in Israel-Palestinian issue. And there had also been reports stating that the United Nations Security Council is having a, predominant secret discussion with the nations, including the United States, for initiating diplomacy in Israeli-Palestinian conflict. My only question is how long? How long will you discuss about diplomacy? Because this has been happening. It is not something that had begun 2 days back. It is something that had been in this globe for almost a century. And where are we now? All they have been trying to do is to invade more and more, to annex more and more, throw people out of their homes. So all these things at the end of the day points our fingers against the role of this whole concept of diplomacy and international organizations. And like as three of us come into a conclusion, although what three of us discuss only a small point into a huge fire. Like all that's happening over there across the country and what Palestinians are facing is something beyond our scope, especially the holy month of Ramadan. Like we know there have been mosques that have been attacked when prayers were going on. Like the kind of condition they are facing is terrible and more than that. So I personally believe this, the only scope that we have at hand is diplomacy. I mean, even if Palestine attempts to come forward with the negotiation talk, Israel and its band of forces in Israel being an ultimate, a dominant power, definitely will have to work on themselves in order to bring this down to an end. I'm not coming up with a one-sided argument. But I mean, the only plausible solution at hand is what Israel can do is to cease fire in accordance to what they rely upon international law. So I think that's the part of argument I have at hand currently. Would you guys like to add on the next step that they have available? They have it as available at hand.
See, according to me, yes, this has to be this has to be taken into consideration because it is an ongoing issue. But even as a country as India has diplomatic ties both with Israel and with Palestine as well. So that is something which someone might take into account, and and also if we compare it to even our own backyard as well, how our conflict still with Pakistan or with surrounding countries is still ongoing despite diplomacy and talks. So I don't know how far talks like just as a point out, talks and diplomacy also how far it goes. But since we have taken forward democracy and we have taken forward the non-violent path, we can't really think of something beyond it. But hoping that like you mentioned the talks which are happening right now, I think if you could just tell about the talks which is happening right now with regard to the situation, and then you can and then conclude, please. Yeah. There's a talk a few minutes back with regard to it.
Yeah, Joel. I mean, like I went through a couple of reports that had stated that Security Council has directly considered this to be an estate problem, a major concern of concern against international peace. And nations, including United States, although they have a notion pro-Israeli, has attempted to bring down the issue at hand. But I also came to know a fact that they are almost delaying the whole procedure in numerous notions as well, although secretive in nature. So hopefully, I don't know how far I can rely on this particular report, but hopefully, in a week's time, things have to settle down over there. I mean, after the hearing of the appeal by the Supreme Court, I mean, Supreme Court has agreed to hear the appeal, although they have extended the hearing, they have agreed to hear the appeal by the Palestinian families against the verdict. So hopefully, things shall settle down in a week's time. But again, fingers crossed. We are not aware about how far it can be done.
And just last concluding remark in consonance to what Maria had stated earlier, although religion is involved, this matter is not religious. This matter is not communal. It's just a dispute and just a fight between two communities over disputed land. And I feel like as a world community, if we can look at it at that way and in that angle, and not look at it as a communal issue. Of course, I don't condone the violence that took place in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where the stun grenades were thrown into the mosque and there was tear gas and there was a lot of violence in the mosque. Of course, I don't condone that. But at the same time, this whole Arab-Israeli conflict should be looked at as two people fighting over disputed land and not a religious matter. And maybe as a world community, then we'll be able to empathize with the victims and we'll be able to look at this matter with a more neutral set of eyes.
I think that brings us to the end of the podcast, and how we as commoners looking into the situation, and how difficult it is to even say. Like some might say that it's when some people say it's complicated, it's not complicated, but then like we as normal citizens may not be able to take into account several factors as well. But then according to what we've discussed, we're able to ponder as to how the community at large can take notice of the same. So in the end, with that being said, thank you for tuning into our episode. Do put forward your comments in the comment section with regard to the session, and also if you'd like to join us in the next session as well, and how you found the session to be useful, and also how you had differing opinions with regard to the same as well. We will be welcoming as well. And do follow our Instagram page and also our various platforms. We also have a website as well, so you can you can tune into our episode over there as well. And in the end, thank you for listening to us. Thank you.